If you're wondering what Universal Design for Learning is, you've come to the right place. We're talking about UDL and accessibility for your online classrooms. Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, it provides a framework to create learning materials, activities, and classrooms that meet the needs of diverse learners within your classroom. The goal is to minimize barriers and maximize the learning for all students in a classroom. This goes for any classroom that's out there, whether it's face-to-face, online, or a hybrid combination of the two. Mostly, this is based on the idea that accommodations help everybody, not just those people who have disabilities. So, a common example, if you were to go and walk around on a sidewalk and you come up to a place where there maybe is a crosswalk to cross the street, and the sidewalk has a depression where the sidewalk is lowered down to the level of the street. That accommodation is present for people that might be utilizing a wheelchair to get around. But that accommodation that's created is actually really useful for more than just people in wheelchairs. It's great for people pushing strollers, people riding on bicycles. I know my daughter certainly benefits from those when trying to cross the street because she can't quite hop the curb yet. So the whole point of UDL is that when we make the world more accessible, it actually helps everybody. An example specifically for classroom content, the first thing we think about with accessibility and universal design is having closed captions on our video files. And we really think that that's to help students who can't hear the presentations, but in reality, a lot of different learners will use the captions. If you have content that's heavy in jargon, those captions can help the students understand what you're saying so that they see those correct jargon words. Maybe you have a student has a sleeping baby and they don't want to wake a child, but they want to get some coursework done and they're in the same room. So again, it's just one small example of how the accommodations we create help everybody. It helps all. So mostly when we talk about UDL, they really get into having flexible curriculum. So we need to identify the goals of the course, think about the methods that we use to meet the goals and the materials and the assessments that we use to evaluate them. So how do you apply it? Basically, you need to start out with your learning goals or your competencies, and then consider all the barriers that are potentially present that might prevent students from reaching the goal. So we really think about the representation of the content, how students are interacting and expressing their understanding. So engagement would be the interaction, but action and expression talks a little bit about how they're learning and how they're showing you that they're learning. So what do we mean by multiple means of representation? This is probably the easiest one to grasp. This is really how you present your course content. We can meet this by using multiple types of media. So an example, if we have a video lecture, the students can see the lecture and they can hear the lecture. If we add closed captioning and transcript files, it rounds out the representation so that students can have the choice to see it, hear it, and read it. To get that content. Basically, when you're creating your class, you want to create a content buffet to give students options when going through the content. For example, in my class, we have a textbook reading, we have video lectures that do have the captioning files, we have sometimes websites, and sometimes I'll throw in like additional longer videos. But it's really been curated to help go over all of the content. They all cover the same things. And then I give students the choice to pick and choose the content that they like to learn from the best. Okay, so there's your multiple means of representation. For multiple means of action and expression, this is where you're thinking about how learners can show you what they know. So really it comes down to having multiple assessment types. When we only use one type of assessment, we are undoubtedly going to be creating a non-equitable experience for some of our learners. Not everybody is a test taker. Not everybody is a paper writer. Now, there are going to be things that come back. If you're in an English class and they have to write papers, they're going to have to write a paper. I get it. But as much as possible, we do want to provide multiple assessment types, both formative and summative, for the students to show you what they know. So in an example from one of my classes, I like to use final projects, but I actually have many things they have to do. The students have to write a final paper. So the students that are really great at writing, this is like easy stuff for them. The students then also explain what they know in a final presentation. And then if I wanted to add some drawing activities, because we do have some students who I think they comprehend and express things better visually, so we can add a student-created diagram to the project as one of the project components to round out this expression. So the good thing for me as an instructor, and it sounds like a ton of work. There's more things to look at. But when I read a paper where I'm like, man, this really hard to understand. Maybe I have an English as a second language learner in my class, and English is not their strong suit. So when they're taking the class with me, I'm reading the paper and it's like, I think they get it. I think they get it. But then, when I actually listen to their final presentation, wow, that just solidifies it. They can explain what they learned much more easily than writing it, because they just don't maybe have all of the mechanics necessary for the writing. So that's a benefit for me. I can actually really see if they get it. And mostly I just want to know if they get it. It's okay if they can't get it in all three types. They get it. So just remember, there's no one way to assess learning. And the more options you provide to your students, the more learners that you'll be able to meet where they are. We also want to provide multiple means of engagement. So this is really how learners interact with our content, the other students, and the instructor. So those three types of learner interactions. We want to use different types of learning activities throughout our course. That makes it so that it actually maintains that engagement overall. An example within a course unit, you might have the students interacting with your content on some auto-graded quizzes and in a lab assignment. They'll be interacting with other students on a discussion or a learning activity, and they'll interact with the instructor through maybe assignment feedback, instructor videos, or other course communications. So there's multiple ways that they're engaging with the content and with each other. So they're getting it a lot. Now we're going to transition and just talk about accessibility. So this is usually what we think about first before we think about universal design. We think, oh, we've got these learners. I've got somebody with an accessibility need. They're deaf, they can't hear, so I've got to adjust. I'll tell you now, when designing a class, when it comes to accessibility, do it now. Don't wait until you have a student that has a need. It is much easier to create your course to be accessible from the beginning than it is to modify an existing course. You do want to make sure you have an accessibility statement in your syllabus and within your online course. Make sure you let learners know how they share their needs with you. Make sure you know what supports are available at your institution and how it works. Again, don't wait until you need to know. Learn it now. When you're building your course, I'm just going to talk about 4 basic things. As you're creating your course materials and you're thinking about text design, you want to make sure that you're very consistent. Use only one font style in your course. Choose a sans serif font, something like Arial, so it doesn't have the little serifs, the little tags on the fonts. It's easier to read on the screen. Use black fonts on white backgrounds, and forgive me, this is a white font on a dark background, but you want to make sure you're using this high contrast so that people with any visual limitations can see things very clearly. Use bold and italics sparingly. when you're trying to emphasize words, choose which things you're emphasizing carefully and don't overdo it. Next, don't ever use underlining to um, draw attention to something. Underlines are associated with your hyperlinks. So if a student sees an underline, they might think it's a hyperlink and then get really frustrated when it doesn't do anything. So skip those underlines. If you're going to use text stuff, use bold or italics. And the last thing that I'll say here is to avoid the use of colored fonts. Anybody who has a color vision deficiency will struggle significantly if you're using colored fonts. The most common type of color blindness is with red-green. And you might think, oh, I just won't use red. Red is a terrible font color to use, but in reality, anybody that has a color deficiency, it's not just they have trouble with one set of colors. There's a lot of overlapping with colors, so they won't be able to tell blues from purples or greens, depending on which type of color blindness. And one individual might have many colors that they find challenging. So again, just skip the colored fonts and your students will be much happier. There are a lot more students out there with color deficiencies than you realize. Next, as far as images and graphics, make sure you choose images and graphics that are relevant to your content. I have an example here of a falcon landing. It's definitely not relevant to this slide, so I wouldn't normally put it in here. I'm using it just as an example. We do need to make sure we use those alternative texts for all images in our courses. So I actually what you see in this image is a falcon. I believe it's a peregrine falcon coming in for a landing. So I've used the fonts in the presentation to show you what the alternative text would look like. Basically, when I scroll over an image in my course and it has that alternative text, that will actually come up, and then it allows somebody with a visual impairment using a screen reader to know what is being shown. You do want to have all your images being high resolution. I wouldn't put GIFs necessarily within my course. You know, flashing, moving things can be harder for people to see if they do have any visual challenges. And if you're giving a presentation like I am now, provide an explanation of any photo, video, diagram that you have on your screen. So if you were paying attention, I did say, you know, on the screen we have a photograph of a falcon coming in for a landing. And then I pointed out I'm using it as an example. If you're just running a presentation and the student is listening to the recording and you don't really address what's important on the screen, they're going to miss it. So make sure you include it. Next, for accessibility with your audio and video, make sure that it's clear. Try to reduce background noise as much as possible. Use very consistent volumes and limited refocusing on your video. If you're recording on a screen reader, currently I'm using a headset with a microphone to avoid some of that background noise and try to keep my volume as consistent as possible. You want to try to keep your audio videos and any sound recordings short. Less than 10 minutes is definitely ideal. If things get really long, you might want to start breaking things into segments. This lecture is already over 13 minutes, and for that I apologize. You do need to use closed captioning, transcript files on all of your audio video materials, and it's definitely recommended that you check with your institution to see what's provided to help you out. If you don't have it, when you upload things to YouTube or wherever you're putting it, you might go under the assumption that there's some auto-generated files out there. You're still going to want to download them and clean them up, because when you actually read it, it will be gobbledygook. There'll be some strange translations that you'll see, and when your learners are trying to maybe understand your jargon, they're going to miss that. So make sure you don't forget those. The last thing to think about are your documents. So basically, make sure you follow all of the notes for text design because documents are text files, but all of your documents need to be searchable. So this is really important for our PDF documents. If you have like a reading and you scanned it as a PDF file, it's not going to be searchable. So your students with their screen readers cannot read it. So you'll need to provide an alternative text file for the students to use. If you have tables and charts within your documents, make sure you're using headers, labels, and summaries. And then remember, again, those accessibility notes. All of those together, if you, again, plan from the beginning as you're putting stuff into your online course, think about accessibility with every new thing that you add. And when you do encounter a student who has an accessibility need, you're going to be ready and the students will truly appreciate it. And because of Universal Design for Learning, all of your other students are going to appreciate it as well. I hope you found this presentation helpful. I look forward to your questions in the comments.